Hello, Superintendent Turner. Thank you so much for sitting down and having yet another conversation with me as an individual parent in the community, but also as the leader of the Montclair PTA Council. I appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us individually as PTA presidents have approached you, but also to talk to us as a collective and spending all that time answering questions. And of course, you know how this goes. More questions come up, continue to come up and bubble up from our community. I think one of the things that you're learning about Montclair and Montclair culture is that I've heard you say everyone has an opinion, but the plus side of that is that people are also coming with ideas and with the question of how can we help? How can we be engaged in this process? So I'm wondering, as you're going about making your decisions, how are you bringing other ideas and other perspectives into that process?
Because these are mid-year cuts and significant, $7 million is significant in terms of cuts, especially for a school district our size and our budget. Because it's in the middle of the year, there were some things that we could not traditionally do. So let's say, for example, where there might have been really low enrollment, sort of combined classes, or possibly, different things that we can't do mid-year. So what we've had to do is look at those positions with our state advisors that are considered not mandated in state law, right? So that's how we approach that. And again, because $7 million was so significant, we had to take a $7 million shortfall and balance it down to zero, which we're obligated by law to do. And that is how those cuts came to be about. There was no real room for community input because, again, this is a budget that we've inherited. And in order to get the necessary resources in between from the state to make payroll in the next couple of weeks and months, we've had to balance that budget. And propose those cuts to the Board of Education in anticipation of what might happen on December 9th.
Did I hear you say that you have been speaking with state advisors about what can and cannot be done? So that was input that you had in the process?
Yes. So, of course, all along, once I've recognized was a deficit, we informed all the proper individuals that need to know, local, county folks, state folks, everybody that would need to know to single, hey, we have a problem here, and also in anticipation that we may have to get an advance on our state loan, on our state aid. That is required if you have a deficit to inform the Department of Education, New Jersey Department of Education, which we did. And we're also assigned an individual to work with us through this process. One, to verify that indeed we are in a deficit, which that individual did, but also to work with us through this process of getting ready for the special elections and doing the corrective action plan and things of that sort.
Okay, so someone at the state level has already been involved in the process and in these conversations.
Yes.
Okay, great. What about folks are asking in the cuts? We understand that there are ones state mandates and then everything extra, and that's where you're looking at making cuts. But input into those decisions, are you having conversations when you looked at cutting certain contracts? Like, are you talking to teachers or and students and getting their input about what things they find effective and not so effective?
No, absolutely not. Only because, one, it has to be fast and furious in order to get the money that we need. But this is not, mid-year is not necessarily where folks, it would have been an act for me, and it would not have been meaningful. By that, I'm saying is that $7 million is significant. You have to balance that budget to zero. We got rid of all contracts that we can get out of that were not essential to support our curriculum initiatives, right? So it wasn't a matter of which ones do we keep, right? It was that we got rid of, unfortunately, had to make cuts in those areas where there were not necessarily state required, right? And that's how you do it. In that instance, if I was to go ask people for their opinion, it would be meaningless, right? Because these cuts because it's mid-year, some things you can't do in the middle of the year, right? This is disruptive, but it would be super disruptive to do certain things in the middle of the year.
Got it. So what about moving forward? What are the opportunities for community input? Absolutely. How are you engaging?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always valued, both as an individual and as a professional, is all through my career is recognizing, right, in the power of the collective that we are a community. So you will see that as we begin to prepare to kick off our 26-27 budget year, I don't want to assume, but perhaps it'll be very different than what Montclair's experienced in the past. I can't be sure of that because I'm not sure exactly what was done. There will be opportunities through survey for folks to share with us what our budget priorities should be, what are those things that are really critical, right? And then once we have the figures in, right, as we're building the budget, once we know what our state aid is, what our revenues are, and we plug in those mandated things that are non-negotiable, then we will also have public input in terms of, let's say, now we have $30 million, looking at our priorities, we said this was a priority, and how does that fit in? So community will have a lot of input in terms of building that budget with us together, where in the past, my understanding is that the first time anybody knew was during the budget presentation, perhaps in May, when there's a vote. That will not be the case in this. It'll be the same way that I've led since I've been here, which is open and transparently with community input. Recognizing that just because we're asking for community input, not every individual will get what they see as important. We have to look largely the impact that it will have on our students, both potentially positive, maybe some negative input, but all along the way, people will know the whys, right? So why did you decide to fund this and not that? A lot of it will be data-driven in terms of what is the population of our students that need more support than others. And if we have that data, we then have to also be able to fund those resources those students need. So the community will always understand the how and the why. We may not always be in agreement, but folks will know why. And a lot of those decisions, all of them will be driven by data, so that we're not preference or this one said that, but we're actually going to look at the data that tells us what students are succeeding, what students need additional supports, and make sure that we budget those supports that they need to be successful.
Okay, so from that, can you give us an idea of how early in the process, what's the time frame, when can the community expect to hear about the budget for the coming year?
Shortly, we're going to release that shortly. We're still, plugging down some dates and stuff, organizing calendars. I've also touched base with other folks in the community to kind of say where are opportunities for us to go where we may not, a lot of the town halls I have in our schools because I can control being there, right? Sure. But also giving opportunities for other segment of our community. Perhaps, do I need to come to a place of faith, right, that folks want to hear? Do I need to go to a community center, right? Do I need to go, so just as much as possible in many different formats, getting that community input. And I'm going to need individuals' help, like you guys as leaders, to kind of say, here's an opportunity to talk with this group and get some feedback, share information in the budget process. So shortly, I would say, because this is a short week, in the next 2 weeks, we'll have a budget calendar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Excited to hear that it's going to be so soon, and looking forward to that. I'm wondering how you're going to ensure a diversity of perspectives and viewpoints, and so for people who aren't part of those faith community groups or other community groups that you visit, how can you ensure other voices are heard, especially those that are not normally in the conversation or have easy access? Yeah,
I'm going to depend on the community, right? I've met with many different community members, very, very many different. So I will I need to lean on the community to tell me, where I need to go, working with, as I said, leadership here in terms of the aspect of community that may not typically engage in the traditional way of doing that. So again, I'll do all that I know to do, but I am going to need the community to say to me, hey, we'd love for you to come here and talk with this group that we've organized in this way, right? Of course, we're going to still use social media. We're going to use the traditional emails, newsletters, town halls, but I'm going to really depend on folks to steer me to those voices that don't typically, right, get the opportunity to perhaps give the kind of feedback that they need to give because they're part of our community.
Mm. So I'm guessing that the pace you're keeping is not sustainable. You can't be everywhere all the time and meeting with every community group, right? So going forward, how are you going to bring those voices in? Are you going to look to certain people to give you feedback on a regular basis? What are those opportunities going to be?
So we will always have, even if one day it'll be just great news to share, but we will always have town halls. I do believe in the power of that direct information sharing, but also for me to get opportunity to hear other folks' perspective and also to share recommendations. Because again, it's going to be, it's our community, right? And we're going to have to problem solve together. So I will always have those traditional ways of the town halls. It may be in different places depending how I get invited, but we're also in the early stages of forming a community advisory group. And that would be looking for folks. There's tons of really dedicated individuals in Montclair, and I sincerely mean that, which has been refreshing for me, who are willing, as I said, to problem solve, to give up their time and resources to help us do that. So introducing this superintendent advisory group that looking for individuals to make a one-year commitment. So again, folks can decide what works for them or what doesn't, with various different sort of expertise or role in the community, so that they are part of advising on various things. Of course, one, financial, right? Because we're always going to pay attention to that and keep that in the forefront of and everything that we do, but also other things that might come up, right? Whether it's technology, our curriculum, all those things in where we don't want to make that decision in isolation with just administration or even staff within Montclair Public Schools, but with the larger community.
Okay. So Montclair has a track record of listening to and sometimes accommodating the loudest voices, or the ones that speak most frequently. How can people have confidence that the decisions you make will be based on actual or real costs and not in response to these loudest voices?
Yeah, really, really important, because I've learned very early on what people are accustomed in terms of the office of the superintendent. And folks will tell you in a very short period of time, things have changed greatly. I think it's really important for everyone and anyone to share their perspective, to give feedback. We have an avenue for that, that folks, because they get a lot of emails that they can send there. But I'm not going to make systemic decisions based on the experience of a few people, right? Those are still important, right? And we need to address that. Again, it'll be data-based, right? And the larger public will be aware of those decisions and the whys. So it'll leave very little opportunity. One, I don't operate that way, but it'll leave almost no opportunity for folks to be able to operate in the way that they've have in the past. So that is how I've always approached things. In every community, you're going to get those folks who have the resources and the time, who are constantly right in your office. And not to say that their concerns are not important, but recognizing that, you represent one segment of concerns perhaps, and that we have to look at the larger picture, but also decisions have to be based on data. So then you're taking out the danger of being subjective, right? To individual needs. And I've not been afraid to make those tough decisions, especially when I feel like it's grounded on the right thing. So you got to have process and criteria, and not take away from that. So for example, we have processes in place that I know for a fact previously folks have not always regarded. So when I took office, individuals were like, well, you need to do this for me because this is how it was done in the past. And I was like very clear, I trust you that it was done in the past because I see it. However, it violates our policy. It's not the right thing to do, and I will not continue that. And individuals have been upset, but I've been very respectful, and I've always addressed the why and grounded it right in our practices and policies. So I think setting those systems and structures, which I'm working really hard with our team, so that there's processes, and then if we stick with the process, it's fair across the board, right? So that is some of the systems that we're putting in place.
Thank you, Superintendent Turner. I'm glad to hear that you are trying to ground your decisions in data and processes that work for everyone. It sounds like you really are being thoughtful about creating different avenues for people to come to you with their concerns and their perspective, but always stepping back to look at the bigger picture. So I appreciate that, and I thank you for continuing to be available to engage in conversation and refreshing your FAQs and providing us with updated information. Thank you.
And thank you for your work and your partnership. I appreciate it.